The Philadelphia Eagles had an outstanding season last year. 2022, they ended up in the Super Bowl and were a controversial call away from possibly winning that thing. 2023, a different season, but that roster looks like it is absolutely incredible again. Again, we got Gino Cammilleri speaking to us from Locked On Eagles. Let's talk Philadelphia Eagles today. Let's get into this, man. Gino, what's going on, my man?
It's a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. I'm glad to talk Eagles at all times, and Locked On Eagles is where you could find us. We do it daily. We're back. Camp is right around the corner. It's the best time of year. And for the Eagles, just a little intro. After 2017, there was a big Super Bowl hangover. I think it's the other way around. I think that loss might help this team in the long run because you have Jalen Hurts right now leading this ship. Let's see what he can do after a 14-3 season, going to a Super Bowl and putting on one of the better performances I think we've ever seen from a quarterback.
Yeah, played very well, man. And we'll get into the hangover and all that good stuff. Again, thank you everybody for joining in a Big B Sports Talk. Again, remember to always like, follow, subscribe. We'll keep pushing these things out to you. So, Gino, let's just kind of get into this, man. You mentioned Jalen Hurts. A lot of questions going into last season about Jalen Hurts, which if anybody knows football or pays attention, he answered basically all of them. They answered all of them. Mm-hmm. Can he duplicate that season this year?
I think this question is a two-pronged approach. Can he do it? And will he do it? I think he can, absolutely. And why do I say that? Well, let's look at his career. He started at Alabama as a guy who wasn't really much of a quarterback, right? He was more of an athlete. He figured out how to play the quarterback position. And when he did, he was benched in a national championship game. And in today's transfer portal era, 10 out of 10 people are leaving that situation. 100%. And what does he do? He comes back and he battles. And he comes up in a big spot. Then he comes up in a big spot for Oklahoma. Then he comes up in a big spot for the Eagles. So every time you're saying, can he not do something? He turns around and does it. Yeah. I was down at the Senior Bowl when he was there with Justin Herbert right next to him. And I mean, I'm biased. I'm an Oregon guy at heart. But when you watch Justin Herbert and Jalen throw the ball just a couple of years ago, you're saying, yeah, I'm taking Justin Herbert to play quarterback and we'll see what Jalen can do. And now you're saying, is Jalen Hurts as good of a quarterback as Justin Herbert? Right. And that's a legitimate conversation. And will he? Well, let's look at history. Let's look at Donovan McNabb back in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. He had a great offensive line. He had a great running back there. But outside of one season with Terrell Owens, they didn't have those weapons that Jalen Hurts has, right? No. You have Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith might be the best big three in all of football. It's got to be in the conversation. And they add DeAndre Swift, who's a pass-catching running back who's eclipsed 500 yards multiple times in his career. Why can't he throw for 4,000 yards? Why can't he run for another 1,000 and take this team to the promised land once again? I think that comes with understanding and maturing his game because we know that the Josh Allens of the world, the Lamar Jacksons of the world, you can't take their legs away, right? That's one thing you can't do, especially in today's modern game where you want to make football not just 11 on 11, but maybe even 12 on 10 where you include the quarterback.
Yep.
I think Jalen can only continue to expound on what he did because he knows his faults and his weaknesses better than anybody. And now he has another offseason under his belt, being the guy. And you have continuity at the play caller position because he is losing his coordinator. But Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, he's known Jalen since he was a kid. And who's going to hold Jalen Hurts more accountable than somebody that's friends with your dad, right? Yeah. Like one of your dad's friends is always going to call you out on your nonsense. Absolutely. And I think Jalen Hurts is going to be in a great situation with everything that he has around him, that if he just is Jalen Hurts and he doesn't run the ball more than he needs to, and he doesn't try to force the football like we saw a lot from Carson Wentz, he can continue to be and can continue to project as one of the better quarterbacks in football, not just now, but he's 24. How long can that go for? And that's my hope. Fingers crossed. We knew all the questions last year, and Nick Sirianni said, we'll give him the keys to the car. Well, at this point, he is the car. Let's
Yeah.
keep this thing on the road.
Well, the one thing about Jalen Hurts that I don't think it gets talked about enough, it gets talked about a little bit, but not enough, is the type of leader that he is. You kind of mentioned that at the very beginning, which kind of leads me to the next question. Tons of teams. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You lose a Super Bowl, you have a hangover. There were so many years that, in a row that teams that would lost the Super Bowl didn't even make the playoffs the next season, even if their roster came back pretty much intact. I mean, like I said, the proof was in the pudding. I don't see that from this Eagles team. I mean, the question is, I guess, do they have a Super Bowl hangover? I guess the better question might be, is it a Super Bowl hangover the opposite direction? Kind of what you mentioned is that, hey, man, this team is fired up because they feel like maybe they let one get away.
Well, let's take a step back, and I already mentioned that 2017 team that won the Super Bowl, right? Well, if you look at the construction of that roster, outside of a few core pieces, there were a lot of aging veterans on their way out. They were one of the older teams, and you saw it. The Chris Longs of the world aren't there anymore. And I mean, even on offense, you lose a majority of your offensive line that was there outside of Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson.
Right.
This time around, it's a younger team that has those messages and those lessons that were learned by Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey in that hangover year, mixed with guys that Howie Roseman, all hats off to him, are bringing them into a situation from Georgia, from Alabama, drafting these guys from the SEC, where one word is always on their mind: the expectation. What was the expectation at Bama? What was the expectation at Georgia? It's to win the whole darn thing.
Absolutely.
And you bring in Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, all of these Bama guys that they continue to bring in. What's their expectation? You don't think Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter would love to raise their third trophy in a row? And how are they going to stay on track? Well, it's the Fletcher Cox, the Brandon Grahams, the Jason Kelseys that are pending retirement but are showing up to just OTAs that you don't even have to go to. They're not mandatory. And guys at that age, yeah, we'll show up at training camp and we'll go. No, Jason Kelsey wants to win a bowl as much as the 90th guy on the roster wants to win a bowl. And like you said, I think it's going to be the opposite because they were at the top of the mountain. Imagine you're climbing Everest and you're 100 feet away, and then all of a sudden there's an avalanche and you have to go back. You're like, no, I have to go back. I have to get there. And who better than Jalen, who has seen that? And he was in a national championship and had it ripped away from him to be that guy. But guess what? He came back in an SEC championship. He came back in multiple games for Oklahoma, for the Eagles, where you're saying this guy won you games. And now you're putting more talent around him that is like-minded. And I think that was the part about 2017 that those guys, they were ready. Let's win our bowl. Let's win our ring. We're out of here. There are a lot of ring chasers, the Corey Grahams of the world, guys like that, Torrey Smith. Now there's guys that want to be the next great set of Eagles. And that's what I think you have to lean on. The culture that they built is enough to overcome what happened last year, in my opinion, because those teams that don't go back, I think you get stuck in that rut. Like what could have been. You get stuck in the past. Well, it's a sunk cost. You can't go back and play that game. It's not a Madden simulation where you can restart a season. It's 2023. Go play this schedule and take care of business now. And who better than Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, the holy trinity up top, that have set this message for their organization. It's not just one guy. It's not just Jalen Hurts. Like, as much as I love to talk about him and as much as I was wrong on him coming out of college, it takes 53 guys and beyond. It takes your scouting staff. It takes your pro personnel staff. It takes everybody. And that's what Philadelphia really has come to understand, that after 2017, when maybe one of the three chains of command let themselves down a little bit, Doug Peterson maybe sat on his hands a little bit and Howie Roseman sat on his hands, they realized this is the NFL. And if you sit on your hands, somebody's going to go way past you and you're going to be playing the catch-up game.
Exactly. I think Philadelphia has done a great job of understanding that, it takes everybody. You can't rest on your laurels.
Nope.
One Super Bowl, that's great. Not saying that winning a Super Bowl is easy. Nobody's saying that. However, it's a performance business, man, and you got to continue to do it, because if you don't, number one, you're probably going to lose your job. That's
Mhm.
number one. And number two, teams are going to pass you by because they get paid to win too. So
Mhm.
it's just what the NFL is. Speaking of that, of changing things, they got two new coordinators.
Mhm.
So a lot of things could change, possibly change. Do you see a lot of philosophical changes coming with two new coordinators? You know, speaking of the type of roster that they have and guys coming back, do you think there's going to be a lot of philosophy changes?
Let's go to offense first because I think that's an easier question to answer. And I had brought up Brian Johnson, who, for those unfamiliar, if you ever played the NCAA football games, he was on the cover as a Utah Ute back in the day, and he went on to Florida to be the offensive coordinator. And like I said, he has known Jalen Hurts since he was a kid. And the thing with hiring Brian Johnson is they wanted to keep continuity for Jalen Hurts, who has seen multiple coordinators over his career, right? And last year was the first time he had back-to-back years. So once again, you're saying, Jalen, we are going to give you a new play caller, but we want to keep the philosophy as close to what we saw last year as possible because the offense wasn't the problem. They scored 35 points in that Super Bowl.
Right.
Outside of one little mishap from Jalen Hurts, they did their job. And they
Right.
did their job a lot of the times. Look at their 30-plus point outings. And can they even get better? That's the thing. And I have more ease on the offensive side of the ball because personnel is rather similar as well. You're only losing technically two starters, your running back, who is more by committee, and your right guard. Where defense, we switch over to that side of the ball, that's probably where you'll see more of a philosophical change because Jonathan Gannon coming in 2 years ago was a first-time coordinator. Sean Desai, who was just hired from Seattle, has been around some of the better defensive minds you have seen in the sport. He was with Vic Fangio in Chicago, and the Eagles brought in Vic Fangio during that Super Bowl run to try and read his mind and try and help him input the game plan to hopefully win a Super Bowl. So they were always chasing that Fangio effect. We want that guy that can create that modern style of defense where you're going to see more odd front stuff, where it's more three guys in the dirt, the Hassan Riddick, who's a stand-up, Nolan Smith, who's a stand-up, see more hybrid roles from them. One will probably drop into coverage. One will probably play a little more pass rush. And we're probably going to play a mix of a lot of different coverages, quarters on the back end, a little bit of cover three on the back end. And why is that? Well, if you look at the personnel mixed with the coordinator change, you lost technically about 5 starters on defense.
Yeah.
Javon Hargrave up front, your 2 tight ends in TJ Edwards and Kaiser White, and then Marcus Epps and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson at safety. You don't have multiple guys who are potential all-pros, guys who had their best season being TJ Edwards and Marcus Epps. Those guys are gone. Javon Hargrave is gone. How are you going to combat that? Well, I take a look at what Sean Desai did last year in Seattle. That defense didn't have star power, right? They had young guys like Tariq Woolen on the outside and Darrell Taylor rushing the passer, but they were still a dominant force. And that's really what got them to the playoffs was that Geno Smith was a guy that could keep them in games, do enough when he had to, but the defense ultimately was way better than what I thought people expected. And Jonathan Gannon, having the best defense the Eagles have ever had in terms of personnel last year, let them down in the biggest spot. So now I see Sean Desai come in and say, he has more than what he had in Seattle, but less than Jonathan Gannon. But I can expect him to squeeze more out of that orange and get a little more juice out of that defense than what we had in Gannon, even without that personnel. And I'm not the only one saying that. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Darius Slay, these guys have said that Gannon didn't put them in the best positions at times. And that's guys that were on that defense. So I want Sean Desai to come in and say, you guys are going to be in the best position to succeed. Whether it's Terrell Edmonds seemingly just playing a linebacker / strong safety role and never putting him back on the back end, because if you do that, you're playing to a player's weakness. You have to play to their strengths, and that's what I believe the Fangio system ultimately gets out of these players, and hopefully Sean Desai can take away from that, because there's one example of a player that I look at, Bryce Callahan. This guy, he was in Chicago with Fangio. He went out to Denver with Fangio. He was a corner that, by all intents and purposes, you're not talking about him as one of the better guys in the game. But if you look at his time period in those two defense, he really excelled. And if you could get that type of play out of, all pro, Darius Slay, All-Pro James Bradbury,
Yeah.
Avonte Maddox, a top 5 nickel corner. If you
Yep.
could get that type of play, who's to say that the defense can't get back on track? And they have youth. They have athleticism. They have speed. So you got to utilize that. You're not going to have 11 guys that are potential All-Pro candidates next year. You're going to have to win in different ways. But I believe Sean Desai is that guy that can get more pulp out of the squeeze, as I said earlier.
One guy that I think on defense that, he got hurt last year that is going to be a bigger factor in stopping the run is Jordan Davis.
Bingo.
That guy, I'm just telling you, man, as an old offensive lineman from 100 years ago, you just watch him play and you watch his athleticism. You watch him before he got hurt and after he got hurt, his explosiveness got taken away.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to be a difference maker because teams could run the football against the Eagles. But when he's out there, I'm just telling you, they're not going to be able to do it. Another guy, and I'll get to this later, but I'll bring it up now. I think somebody that didn't play a ton of snaps, but when he did was super explosive was Nakobe Dean. I think he is going to be a guy that just electrifies what they're trying to do at the linebacker position for Philadelphia. He got drafted low because of some BS injury type of stuff, and everybody was passing on him. And I'm like, how did the Eagles get this guy in the 3rd round? This is unbelievable. I just think those two guys, it doesn't matter that they're from Georgia, but they are from Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
But those guys, I'm just telling you, I believe that they are going to change the lives of some of that defense. Not that the other players aren't good. I just believe that those two guys are going to be key guys that maybe people don't know about. And I guess that goes to asking the next question. Are those two guys or anybody else that fans maybe don't know a whole lot about, who they should know a whole lot about right now?
I think Howie Roseman is thinking the same exact question you are. Can these guys be explosive and electrify this defense moving forward? Because if you look at last year's draft, those 3 guys really didn't play with your first 3 picks. You had
Correct.
Jordan Davis, who got hurt halfway through the year, right?
Yep.
Cam Jurgens didn't see much action at all because he was drafted to be a center, and now he's battling for right guard, so he might be a starter. And then Nakobe Dean, I love that you brought him up because there might not be a guy who, outside of Jalen Hurts, this season might rest as much on his shoulders as anybody else, because you lost TJ Edwards and Kaiser White, who provided you the best linebacker duo play you've seen since the days of Jeremiah Trotter back in the day, right? And you haven't had that sideline to sideline guy. But when you saw Nakobe Dean play in limited snaps, you saw why this guy was recruited to Georgia and won a national championship and was the green dot caller, because he is the modern day linebacker. Yep. Now he's going to be tasked with doing a lot of things. One, being the quarterback of the defense. Can he step in right away and take that job over? I think it's good that it's a new coordinator and him and Sean Desai can kind of build that relationship from day one. 2, can he get back to form in limited minutes? And 3, can he play above his size? And I mean that more in the pass game, because if you look at the Giants right now, they just got Darren Waller.
Right.
Well, you don't have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Your slot corner is Avonte Maddox, who's like 5'10". He's probably not going to be covering tight ends. Terrell Edmonds will probably mix in there, but a lot of the time, Nakobe's going to be tasked to cover those guys. I know he could fill gaps, but it's a passing league these days, right? And you are going to have that ability. But I believe he can, man, because he is instinctual. He's smart. I love what he said about how he got into that Georgia defense his first year. He said he got a section of the playbook and he just mastered that.
Right.
Just the sub package. And he became a master in that to find a way on the field. And he did that last year. When he found his way on the field, you're seeing his hat on a hat every single snap. He's not getting bullied out of gaps. He's athletic. He can get to sideline to sideline. They tried to draft Davian Taylor a couple years ago to be that guy. TJ Edwards, they lucked into. Kaiser White, they only had for a year. Nakobe is the biggest investment they've made at this position outside of Michael Kendricks and Jordan Hicks back in the Chip Kelly days, right? So he's going to have to come in and make up a couple hundred tackles that they lost in Edwards, White, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But those Georgia guys, man, let's say Jordan Davis can develop into even 75% of what Dexter Lawrence or a Quinnen Williams is, right?
Yeah.
Well, then behind him, you have Jalen Carter. You said, how did the Eagles get Nakobe Dean in the third? How did they get Jalen Carter in the top 10? How did they get Nolan Smith? How did they get Keely Ringgold? Howie Roseman didn't outsmart himself the last 2 years. And that's probably the one thing that has helped them more than anything. If you saw the descent of what was the Titanic of the Carson Wentz years, the iceberg hit was drafting Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson.
Yep.
Howie Roseman outsmarted himself. And then after that, he wrote on a piece of paper and told his staff, we have to keep it simple and they have to be all of these three things. Are they healthy? Can they run? And do they love football? Well, I'll tell you what, every single guy from Alabama that they drafted, every single guy from Georgia that they've drafted hits all three of those criteria. And that's why they are better set up to succeed this year. So going back to your original question, outside of the dogs that you know, some guys that you should know, Milton Williams on the defensive line. Javon Hargrave's gone. They need somebody that can rush the passer. Milton Williams has been one of the better rotational guys that they have had that can get off the ball. The kid is explosive. He's quick. He gets upfield in the blink of an eye. And Fletcher Cox isn't getting any younger. Take note of him. You look at the offensive side of the ball, you know that they got DeAndre Swift. They signed Rashad Penny. Keep an eye on Kenneth Gainwell. They trusted him down the stretch last year. And in a big moment in the Super Bowl, he was arguably the favored back that they gave the ball to. And you're saying, DeAndre will probably be a big element in the pass game. If Rashad can stay healthy, he's very explosive as a runner. Well, Kenny Gainwell, you look at Tony Pollard over in the Cowboys backfield, he's a poor man's Tony Pollard. That's the Memphis running back style. They're quick, they're elusive, they can hit inside zone, they can hit outside zone, and the Eagles do a whole bunch of that stuff. So keep an eye on him. And one last guy that I'm going to mention, he comes off of a career best year in Atlanta last year. And at a position where outside of the big two, Quez Watkins let you down at the wide receiver position last year in a big moment in the Super Bowl. Olamide Zaccheaus, who they just signed from the Atlanta Falcons, if he can push the pace at that third receiver position. In the NFL, money is in the crumbs. Money is in finding those guys, the rotational pieces, the depth pieces, the Reed Blankenships, who are the UDFAs that down the stretch are going to play big time moments for you. Well, heck, let's say A.J. Brown down the stretch, he, God forbid, tweaks a hammy or something, and you need somebody to step up at the number two. Well, Olamide Zaccheaus had a career best year with Marcus Mariota throwing him the ball.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're the fourth best passing option, and Devontae Smith is covered, and Dallas Goedert is covered. What can you do with Jalen Hurts throwing you the football?
Right.
I'm excited to see how they can win in the margin areas, because that's where they lost last year. It was on a drop in the red zone by Quez Watkins in the Super Bowl that ultimately cost them that game. So you have to find those guys that outside of the big names that you have are going to come up big when those guys aren't there.
Got it. Makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. And your analogy as far as, the money is in the crumbs. I've been saying that for years. I love that you brought that up, because that is absolutely
War Dogs, great
case,
movie,
man.
Yep.
So before I get you out of here, and again, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Toughest division in football. I'm a Steeler fan, so I say it's the AFC North. A lot of people say it's the NFC East. Either way, it's a crazy division. That division is super tough. Nobody had a losing record last year. I think Washington actually might be a little bit better this year than the Giants. So we'll see. We'll see what happens if they get a decent quarterback play. Moving on from that, though, nobody has won back-to-back division titles in 18 years, which is nuts if you just sit and think about it. 18 years that hasn't happened. But with the roster that the Eagles have, I mean, anything's possible. Don't get me wrong. It's the NFL. Anything is absolutely possible. I still have Philadelphia, even if they lose a couple more games, which I think they're going to win 12 games this year. I still think they're a better team. They'll be a better team. and I still think they're going to win that division. I'm asking everybody. I know it's early. We haven't even had a training camp practice yet. But what do you see as far as the number of wins that they can get there or will get? I shouldn't say can get because that's a kind of a weird question. But how many wins that they can get or will get this year?
History repeats itself a lot in the NFL. You see these running concepts that are coming back from the early 40s in today's landscape. Well, I look at the early 2000s Eagles, and you're saying 12, 13 wins was the standard.
Yeah.
And Doug Peterson said a quote after that Super Bowl, this is the new norm, that a lot of people mocked. But I believe this has to be the new norm, right? You have to win 12 to 14 games every single season, regardless of conference. And it's that much harder now because there's only one team that gets a bye.
Correct.
But it's that much harder and that much more important. And I love what you said, that you believe the Eagles are the better team.
Yeah.
Dallas is Dallas, right? Have they ever had that feel in the last 20 years where you're like, this team feels special?
Nope.
Like they're always like, yeah, they're a collection of guys who are playing for the star. They're playing for it's that more corporate feel. It's that not East Coast feel where you could talk about the guys that go into FedEx Field every week and watch their Commanders and talk about Giants fans who are just diehard. Like the Cowboys just feel different every single year, and you never know with them. You could get a team that is the best offense in football and has a defense that is better than they have been in the past. I just don't see it. Like, is Stephon Gilmore going to put you over? Is Brandon Cooks going to put you over? They're good moves. But are your trench play, is that going to be as good as it was 5 years ago? Probably not. Is your defensive line going to be as good as it was? Yeah, Micah Parsons is very good, but DeMarcus Lawrence doesn't come back around. You got a lot of holes to fill in there. The Giants, I think they're going to be the sleeper in this conference. Washington's defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. If you get 12 wins and you split the NFC East, which I think is probably the expectation, you should want to get 4, but it's the NFC East, like throw out the records any single time those guys play. You're playing the AFC East. You're playing Kansas City. It's a tough schedule, but you can't let that be an excuse. And Jalen Hurts has always played a tough schedule. These Georgia guys have always played a tough schedule. They're playing SEC opponents every single year. That's the expectation. You're playing Dallas, who has the expectation from their owner that they should be a Super Bowl caliber team every single year. That pressure amounts to a lot. Can they overcome that? I don't know. Can the Giants be the Eagles of last year with Daniel Jones? I'm not so sure. Sam Howell, we'll see what you get out of the quarterback play. But at the most important position in football, if it comes down to Dak Prescott or Jalen Hurts, give me Jalen Hurts, please. I've seen him come up in big moments, and I've seen Dak Prescott let that team down in playoff moments. Give me Jalen Hurts 20 times out of 10. I'm going to roll with the Eagles having to win this division. Somebody has to break the curse. It's statistically impossible. It goes 19 years at this point, right? I feel like I'm on a roulette wheel, and my number hasn't hit in 100 spins at this point, right? And you have to believe so. And all credit to the rest of the teams in the NFC East, but you have to know, draft, and build your team to beat those teams. And I think the Eagles have done the best job. I still believe that they have, and I think a lot of people believe in that sentiment as well.
Yeah. I just I like everything about what the Eagles have done. They built their team the right way. They have an outstanding roster. I think they understand, look, we're building a foundation here. They've got to, but the most important part of all of that, Gino, and again, I'll let you go, man, is we talked about it at the beginning. The quarterback is a true leader. He is a leader and believes in team. He believes in winning. He believes in doing whatever you have to do to win. And again, I'm not saying that other teams and other quarterbacks don't have leaders. I'm just saying this guy seems to be different, and you've seen it at all different levels. He's not the fake leader. We see that all the time. The guy that gets out in front of the camera and is rah-rah this, rah-rah that, blah, blah, blah. You get out on the field, they're not a leader, couldn't to save their life. But Jalen Hurts is that leader. I think the Eagles got a good one. I think that he keeps getting better. And when your most important player continues to get better and works as hard as he does every single season, I just think the sky's the limit. And for 2023, I think the Eagles are the best team in the NFC. They may be the best team in football. It's going to be very, very interesting year. But if I'm Philly fans, I'm excited.
You have to be. And I'll just end it with this. And there was a moment during the Super Bowl, and I've kind of looked at football since I've gotten into scouting more as like a puzzle. Like, how does this all come together? And that last piece that you're looking for is to find that guy who's just cool, calm, and collected in every single moment. And you talk about that winning mentality. Yeah, there's been winners that stink at football. Tim Tebow, like terrible football player. But the thing that you look at with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen is that if you're taking this as a hypothesis test, sometimes that leadership ability and that ability to get guys to buy in by simply playing the sport, there's something that no matter how hard you dig, how hard you scout, you will never be able to quantify what that can do to somebody's development and their ability to take a team at the highest level, at the most important position in sport, in any sport.
Mm-hmm.
As I was saying, you're sitting on the couch saying, how is this kid so calm, cool, and collected when I'm sitting here nervous? I'm not even in the game. You have to realize that if everybody feels like that and trusts him and works as hard as him and takes his mentality as the bare minimum, man, he could take that team and lift them all. Rising tides lift all boats. That's truly the story of Jalen Hurts. And I hope for the goodness of this franchise, for the goodness of Jalen Hurts and his future, and just Howie Roseman believing in him fully, that they have finally found their guy that above everything else will do everything for the city to win a freaking Super Bowl.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Well, thank you, my man. Again, I appreciate you taking the time. Anytime you have an opportunity and we can get you on, we will bring you back on, man. So
appreciate it.
I can't thank you enough. Again, everybody, Big V Sports Talk. Again, remember to like, subscribe, follow my man Gino here on Locked On Eagles as well. You guys have a good one.